Hey.
Hey, there he is.
Hi, guys.
Hey, that's better.
How are you, sir?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. I like that you put your little on-air thing. We appreciate that.
Gotta know. Gotta warn others not to come in, just in case.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. This is awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Wonderful.
Damn, I'm just going to turn my volume up because I can barely hear anything.
Can you not hear us?
I can hear you. I can't hear John very well, so I just can turn myself.
I can hear you loud and clear.
There you go. I can hear you better now. There we go. Beautiful.
Hey, fantastic.
So basically what happens is Jamie does a nice little, beautiful little intro. And then we absolutely hammer questions at you, John, okay? Literally bombard.
That's absolutely fine. You will find, Tom, I can talk the hind leg off a donkey on most of these subjects. So you may well have to interrupt me and say, we've run out of time.
Yeah, there's no time limit. So you
We
can
don't
talk
do
as
time
long as you
limits.
like. We don't. And no one wants to hear us talk. We do the show in between the interview anyway, so no one wants to hear us talk. It's all about you, sir.
Well, that sounds good to me. I have an ego the size of France, so that's good.
Excellent.
Wonderful. I'll get my little intro done, shall I?
Excellent.
Ladies and gents, we have another very special guest of us today. You may not know his name, but you will know his voice. His voice has been used on one of the most popular TV game shows of all time, heard on morning radio, and can even be summoned with a simple phrase, "Hey Siri." Today, we welcome to Chronicles not Daniel UK, but the one and only Statman Jon, aka Jon Briggs.
And my rabbit. Don't miss my Easter bunny as well. I mean, it's a little late, but you've got to make it while you can.
Well, exactly. What's his or her name?
Do you know what? It doesn't have a name. It was a present from my mother, and it doesn't have a name. Maybe it should have a name. I think maybe you should name it between now and the end of the podcast.
Oh,
Like
right.
that. I like
Challenge
that.
accepted. I'm actually going to write it down because I know that because we're going to waffle on for ages, I'll forget. So, name rabbit.
Name rabbit. How many other podcasters have you met? And the first thing they've asked you to do is to name their rabbit. I mean, come on.
I'll be really honest, John. 0 until right now.
I like being unique in that capacity.
I love it. Beautiful. Wonderful. Anyway, we should probably get started. I mean, John, how has the last year been for you, my friend?
Hellish. Absolutely hellish. I hated it. I am a social bunny. That is my bunny. I am a social bunny. I like to be out with people. I mean, do you want me to tell you what I really think about it all?
Yes, please.
I actually think an awful lot of what's gone on is criminal, in the sense that, and this is me being slightly serious, and I'm not a very serious person, as I think you've already discovered, but I actually think the process of locking people up is what you do for punishment. And there are so many experiments that have been done with animals and with people that when you deprive them of human company, they die. They die mentally, they die internally, their health fails. And that's what governments almost worldwide have all agreed is the thing to do. And I'm going to be horribly controversial here, and I'm going to say, I'm really sorry. Viruses are awful. Viruses kill people. That's what viruses do. It's miserable. And if you've lost somebody through the virus, you have my heartfelt sympathy, and I am so sorry for you. Because it's an awful thing to happen, to lose somebody you love. I've been there, I've done it. I've lost important people in my life. It's horrific. It's a scar you always wear, and it will never, ever go away. But to do what governments did worldwide, to lock us away from the people we love, the people who can give us sustenance, the people who can make us human, was almost a criminal act. And while I perfectly understand that health services were likely to be overwhelmed, particularly at the beginning when we didn't know what it was going to do, we didn't know how bad it was going to be. That was understandable. The first lockdown, I understood the purpose. I didn't like it, but I understood the purpose. The lack of understanding that's then gone on since then about what you need to do socially. You can be driven by data all you like. You can be driven by scientific data all you like. But you have to consult the social scientists to go and figure out what happens to people when you do this to them. Because there is a a bill, there is a debt, there is a cost between lives and livelihoods. And it was actually Michael Portillo who said it on Question Time sometime around August, and he's the only person I've heard who talked about it. He said, I'm really sorry, it's an unpalatable question, but you have to ask it. What is the cost of a human life in this situation? Nobody has actually come up with that answer. You cost human lives all the time. When you're developing a new motorway, when you're building new towns, you look at the cost that it will cause the community in terms of human lives. That's always been done. It's been done, for decades. But nobody has done this because we are so frightened of death, and we've hidden death away. We hide death away in care homes and hospitals so that only healthcare professionals have to deal with it, and we don't. We pretend la 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 la, it doesn't exist and nobody really should die. And because of that, our being frightened, and the government has managed to frighten us horrendously, which I also think is pretty criminal, being frightened, we have got into this situation where we have lost the responsibility that we've always had, which is how we take a risk. You and I take risks every time we head out the front door. I mean, sometimes if I've seen people cutting bread, you're taking a lot of risks in the home as well. But we take risks, and we weigh up what those risks are on a daily basis and decide whether we will do that, whether we will cross the road in front of the bus or not. And that has been removed from us by people that we elected to serve us, not people who we have decided should dictate to us how we run our lives. I mean, that's the basis of how religions start. Religions start when a bunch of people go, this is how you will live. These are the rules you will live by. You've got a quasi-religious setup going on here with Whitty and Van Tam and all the scientists going around and saying, this is the diktat of how we shall run your lives. Now, I've been saying this since way back when because I'm radical and annoying and a pain in the bum. But it's only now I'm hearing other people say what I've been saying since June or July last year. And alongside that, I've heard lots of people have been going, oh, it is about lives. It's about saving lives. It's about, making sure that people live. And I totally understand that. It would be wonderful if nobody had to die. But unfortunately, this virus has very specific targets. Most viruses, they're pretty difficult to figure out what they're going to do. This one was wonderfully predictable. It went for people who were over 75. It went for people who had underlying health conditions. It went for the obese. It went for those who were diabetic. Those who had conditions whereby the blood clots was the first thing it tended to cause, and breathing difficulties and therefore lower oxygen levels in the blood were very clearly problems that the virus would attack. Since we had a virus that was wonderfully predictable, you could safeguard the groups that were going to be directly affected by it, and governments didn't. Instead, what they did was spend trillions and trillions of pounds on safeguarding people who were totally fit and would have survived the virus and furloughing them, meaning not only did we destroy our society mentally, but we destroyed our economy as well. And for an island nation, for the UK, which is an island nation, we were so well placed to stop the virus coming into the country by closing the borders and spending some of the trillions that have been spent on furloughing people on supporting the transport industry so that it would survive, because you had taken away their work, you had taken away their income. But to spend it so much of this money on people who would have been perfectly okay and getting them to sit at home being paid to do nothing was bonkers in my view. Now, you may call me radical, you may turn around and say, what a horrible man you are, the fact that you might even think of, people, accepting the fact that people will die. But it is a realist's view, and I think it's an important view, and it's a view that I think will come up in probably 18 months, 2 years, when people start to look back at this and hopefully turn around and say, we must never, ever do this to a population ever again. I know of so many young men aged 17, 18, 19 through to their early 20s who have either attempted to commit suicide or who have successfully committed suicide. I'm sure there are young women who feel affected by that too, but it's affecting young men most of all. I have heard of so many of them. That there are an awful lot of people in their 80s and so on who have been deprived of spending time with their families, who know they don't have a huge amount of time left necessarily. And I know that's a category we should safeguard, but should we really lock them up away from the people that they love? We condemn them to a living death almost because of that, because they can't see the people that they want to hold and hug. The fact that we have turned hugging and holding somebody into a sort of social pariah. We don't touch now. We don't do those sort of things. We watch movies now and go, there are two people hugging. Oh my, oh no, it's fine. It's a film. It was probably made before the pandemic. It's okay. But we now react to that. It's what I call coronanoia. It's a paranoia caused by coronavirus. And it's frightening that we are so easily conditioned into this process and have a government that is now very understanding of the fact that it can control us quite happily, and we don't resist. And I know there are people who are marching and protesting against this. You know, the way out of this was herd immunity and vaccines. That's the only way out of this. And there are countries that have locked themselves down and don't want to open until 2023, as far as I can gather, who have no herd immunity at all. And the moment they open their doors, the pandemic will strike, because it does, and we know it mutates. You have to have the immunity within the community. You have to have the vaccinations as well. Combination of those two is the way out. If you look back at the 1918, and this is the final point I make because I've been going on for far too long, but if you look back at 1918, 2 years is what pandemics traditionally take before they tail off, and there is enough resistance within a community to be able to get on with their lives with some degree of normality. But you can hasten that by exposing people to a virus which kills just over 1% of the people who get it. It's tiny. The numbers are tiny. We have a health service that couldn't cope with it. That is also the problem. So you have to fund the health service better than you have done. But all of those things put together, hellish is what I'd say, is what we've witnessed. And an awful lot of it, we were run by intelligent people who have an understanding of how human beings work and how society needs to work. We talked about the Second World War. Sorry, I said I'd finish, but I'm not. We talked about the Second World War. People said, oh, it was, can you imagine it was far worse during the war? It wasn't worse during the war. We could still hug people during the Second World War. They closed the theaters, and then they figured out that actually they needed to keep the theaters open so that morale was kept up during these terrible times when people were being killed. Young people were being killed through no fault of their own. So this whole idea that, we was a better society, we managed it, in the 1940s, it's rubbish. This is the worst thing you could do to a population and to a community that you are supposed to serve. End of message, and I'll get off my soapbox now.
I mean, I wish I had a button for a standing ovation.
And I know my views are not popular. I know there are a lot of people who will take one look at it and go, I'm not listening to this rubbish. Turn that podcast off immediately. But I'm sorry. I think you remove our humanity when you tell people you can't hug, and you now frighten them into a position where they're frightened to hug. How awful is that you would do that to your population?
So my granddad won't come out of the house now at all. And he's keeping my grandmother in with him, and she wants to come out and see. They live up in Worksop, but he will not. He's scared of breathing air, which is just.
I walked past. I was out with friends in Cheshire not that long ago. We're walking in the open air, sunny day. We're just walking back from the meal we just had. I had it way back when at the beginning. I've had both vaccinations. I'm about as bulletproof as you can get. Not that this lady knew it, but she was conditioned to cower on one side of the pavement. And both my friend and I walked off. We walked into the road to walk around her to give her the space. But she was cowering against the hedge to avoid us, because she has been educated that in a 2 to 3 second contact outside in the open air, you can catch this virus from two people walking past you, which we know isn't the case. The likelihood of catching this virus means you need to spend around 15 minutes or so in the company of somebody who is A, positive and carries the virus, and B, is in a room with you which is pretty badly aerated. So there is no cross airflow keeping the place, keeping the flow of the air. So you are in constant contact with it for that length. We know that that's the case. We've learned that. But this poor woman was absolutely paralyzed by fear, again, because of what the media and indeed the government have taught her.
It's just insane. But I almost feel like they wanted that. I feel like they wanted this to happen. They've done it the way they wanted it to. So now they're like, excellent. Now we can, coerce people to do what we want. We'll spend shit tons of money on some app for no reason whatsoever. We'll send all the PPE contracts to all our friends and make loads of money out of this. And we'll just, lie. And basically we'll just spiel our way through this and somehow we'll make it out the other end.
Well, I think there's a bigger picture to what you've just said, Tom, which is that we have in charge somebody. I mean, the edict has always been that Boris always wanted to be prime minister, and he's always wanted to have been prime minister. It's the bit in the middle he's not particularly good at. But unfortunately, it's coincided with one of the biggest problems created outside of the 2 world wars that this country, has had to face. And you needed a leader. Now, I actually teach leadership skills. You may be looking at me and going, really? God, I'm not attending those courses. I teach the basis of leadership. And one of the big things about leadership is you have to make the people around you feel safe. Now, I don't know anybody who can watch Boris, and lots of people will sit there and go, well, I wouldn't like to have been into Boris's shoes from taking some really difficult decisions. And yes, they certainly weren't easy, but we desperately, desperately needed a leader. And unfortunately, what we've got at the moment is a man who's quite happy to lie for his own benefit. We know that he spent a while deciding which side of the line to be in terms of Brexit, which is another soapbox I can get onto, but probably best not during this podcast. We'll save that. But we know that he spent a while trying to figure out what was the best chance of him being elected prime minister by being Remain or leave. It wasn't necessarily what he believed. It was about what was best for his political chances. Now, I know politicians quite well because I've spent a long time interviewing them. Indeed, my father wanted to be one. And somebody once said to me, they said, beware of people who think they have the right to tell you what to do, because they are a specific breed of people. And in fact, one of the reasons our public school system tends to breed a lot of politicians is because public schools fill pupils with confidence that whatever they choose to do, they can do. There is no reason for anyone to stop them. And that's pretty good belief, in fact. And I would encourage more people to encourage their children to have huge self-belief and confidence, because it does mean you go out into the world going, I can conquer this. Doesn't matter, I'll have a few setbacks, but yeah, I know I'm good enough to do this. We should all have an inner confidence that says, yeah, give it a go, try it. I mean, I have an inner confidence that basically says, yeah, I'll say yes to anything as long as there isn't the word bungee or parachute in the sentence. But the rest of the time, I will give it a go. And that was bred for me because I had a minor public school education, and I'm very lucky to have had that education. But it does mean that we end up with people in government who have the idea that it's perfectly okay to tell everyone what they should do. And in a way, you kind of need that, because you don't want someone going, well, I don't know, what do you think? But there needs to be a little bit more of that from government as a whole. And because we've ended up with a slightly bizarre, tousled-haired lunatic who tends to spend his time going, hey, go on, fantastic, off the road to victory, and then say something in Latin before he leaves the room. We've ended up with a man in charge who we regard as being okay, but is actually a liar a lot of the time. And I don't think having somebody in charge of the country who we know lies gives a particularly good message to everybody. And I confess I was one of those people who thought Boris would never really be the leader of the country. Because if you look back about 15 years or so, even perhaps maybe 20, but 15, 20 years ago, the idea that there was a man who had been twice married beforehand and had then carried on a series of affairs and can't actually tell you or isn't public about the number of children that he possesses would then be the leader of the Tory party was quite bizarre when you think of the way that the press and indeed the party castigated former Conservative MPs who did stray, who had affairs, David Mellor and the like, who were castigated for what they did, rightly or wrongly. That's entirely your decision. But we now have somebody who we don't really care that he did all those things. And that's also partly because, well, his sister tends to appear on lots of chat shows and his father appears on reality television. So he's kind of one of us. So we've kind of embraced him in that way, that he does the sort of things and he appeals to us because he's a bit of a buffoon and he's not too serious and we can relate to him more. But I still believe having somebody who we know has lied, who is the leader of the country and who needed to lead during the past 14 months has been a pretty big disaster for how this whole pandemic has been handled. And as I said, leadership is about making the people around you feel safe. I don't think many people can look at him and say, I felt safe watching Boris, because you've looked at him and gone, are you going to make the right decision now? Is it going to be on time? Have you made it? I mean, the very fact that you can leave the Indian variant open for 3 or 4 weeks while it's busily cascading through the population of India and not stop people coming in here. I nearly fell off my chair when I heard that it was only April before Heathrow had gone, yes, we're going to have a separate terminal for people who have come in from red countries. Because up until then, they'd clearly been standing alongside those people coming back from amber and green, you know, they're side by side. It's like, no, the virus, as long as you keep 2 meters from the person in front, the virus doesn't go sideways, it's fine. We're in that sort of level of lunacy on occasions. The fact that Heathrow hadn't sat down and figured this out, that they needed to put all the people from red countries well away from anybody else, because that's how it spread. So we come back to this idea that, you know, everything we've done has been at cross purposes with actually what we really needed to do, which was identify those groups that need to be looked after and look after them. It was that simple.
Yeah, pretty much, John. You've just basically nailed the whole thing. Everything I've thought and wanted to say, that's literally...
Good. Well, is that it, guys? It's been lovely chatting.
Yeah, it's been great. Been a pleasure having you, John. Thank you so much.
Anytime, guys.
Well, we should probably actually get on with some questions, shouldn't we, really?
I've given you chapter and verse on how I see politics and the world in general. So that's my application for Prime Minister. If you wish to vote for me, please do.
Yeah.
I think you've got Tom's vote for sure.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. I'll be your right-hand man.
Excellent. Fantastic. You can run the publicity campaign. You
Yeah.
Can be my Dominic Cumming. Oh, don't mistake him. Clever man. I mean, he got one thing majorly wrong, that, you know, going to Barnard Castle was clearly a bad idea, but a clever man.
I was going to say, Tom, how's your eyesight?
But not too great, actually. I might have to drive to Durham.
I think it's an excellent idea. Nice place, Durham, as well.
Yeah, it is. That's a lovely little town. Anyway, sorry, Jamie.
Yes. John, you got your start with your career in radio, but was that the original plan for young Master Briggs? Was that what you wanted to do since you were small, or?
Yes, I was very, very determined. About age 15, I did an open day at the local radio station, and I thought, this is amazing. I love this. I want to do this. I mean, part of me wanted to be an actor, and I did do some sort of semi-pro or amateur type acting roles. But I really looked at myself and knew I wasn't good enough to make money out of it. It's enormously difficult, and I take my hat off to anyone who tries to be an actor. And I couldn't have cut it. And radio gave me the same outlet of, you know, letting the performance gene loose. And I loved that. And I still think radio is brilliant. My alma mater, which was the BBC, which took me in and gave me the skills that I have and taught me how to make great radio, sadly has changed an awful lot in the past 15 years. And it isn't quite as fun anymore, which is why you see things. You see radio stations like Great British Hits. Is it Great British Hits or GBH? I think it's called. That's grievous bodily harm, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's called. I think it's called Great Hits or Greatest Hits Radio. That's it. Greatest Hits Radio, which is relatively new and has stormed across the country. And it's taken a lot of the DJs that we knew and love. You know, Simon Mayo, for example, and Mark Goodyear. Those people who are stalwart guys who know their radio backwards and are great to listen to, because they understand how radio works. And maybe it is they appeal to our age group because we grew up with them, or my age group, you're a little younger than me. But I think that's a very interesting sign of where radio's gone, because the other radio stations have got themselves slightly tied in knots about how they need to behave in this modern age and who they needed to attract. I think particularly BBC Radio 2 has a major identity crisis. I mean, a wonderful station, and I worked for it for many years. I read news for it. On numerous occasions, but I think when you've kind of got you know, Bob Harris and Johnny Walker alongside Ryan Clark as well, you're kind of saying to your audience, well, you can have this in the afternoon, but then we sweep everything out the window and you can have this instead. I mean, Bob is the ultimate music man. He knows music backwards. Bob was one of my mentors when I first started, because he was actually working at the radio station that I was lucky enough to start at. He taught me how to build a program. You don't just throw it together. I mean, these days it's all computerized. Building a proper music program, you start off with the right song that brings people in so that when they leave the news, there is a reason to go, oh, I love that song, and not retune somewhere else. You pull them in and you inveigle them, and then you then bring the moods to a particular level, and you bring it higher and lower and so on throughout the hour. There is a technique and a trick to keeping audiences involved and loving the radio that you're playing, the music that you're playing. And that doesn't happen anymore. And Radio 2 doesn't function like that anymore. And it kind of ended when the Jonathan Ross debacle happened. And in some ways, yes, it's true, it needed to be more responsible. It needed to have more rules applied to it. But on the other hand, it also lost some of the immediacy and the fun with which you could do things. And I'll give you an example, because the last radio show I did in anger with my name above the door, and I did a radio show, either a daily or a weekly radio show, for over 20 years that had my name above the door. And the last one I did was a local radio show for a station close to where I live. And I'd gone out to do it was the Lotus team, who, as you know, Formula One is very big in and around Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire and so on. We're one of the foremost countries for building Formula One cars and running the Formula One teams. We are brilliant at it. But we went up to to train with Lotus. And Lotus, like I'm sure a lot of the other teams, they have this chassis which has a lawnmower engine in it. And they use that to drive into a fake pit to get the crew to be able to practice changing the tires. And it's quite a fascinating skill. One of the things I never realized, which is daft if you think about it, but when you have this drill in your hand, which basically takes off the big nut on the front of the wheel, you have to take off the nut, which is fine. You pull it off and it goes, and then of course you realize you have to change the direction of the drill before you put the next tire goes back on, you put the nut back on effectively. Now, I never thought about the fact that you actually have to remember to change the direction of the drill. That actually takes quite a lot of time when you're trying to change a tire in less than 2 seconds. Anyway, we practiced this thing and we had a ball, and I think there were journalists from CNN there as well when we were doing our piece. And we did a little piece for telly, we did a little piece for the radio as well, and we beat CNN, but then she was a girl. But they gave us the gloves. They gave us the gloves that you could use, which are fireproof gloves. And we said, you know, no, you can keep those, that's fine. And they didn't let us keep any of the rest of the costume that I put on, but we gave us the gloves. And I thought, brilliant, I can do that as a competition because I don't really need them. So we'll do it on a Saturday morning. We'll run a competition and say, you know, come up with something that, you know, you can win the gloves from a Formula One racing team. I mean, what fun would that be? And we were told no. No, ever since the Blue Peter competition went wrong, naming Socks the cat, because they didn't do the proper competition rules to find out who was going to be winning. I think the winner ended up being known to one of the presenters or one of the production crew. So it all went AWOL. And after that, you can't run competitions on local radio without having it signed off by very senior people at the top of the management chain. So that's kind of how ridiculous it's gone. And when I did breakfast back in Oxford, way back when, I was 20 years old when I did the breakfast show in Oxford, we used to give away all sorts of ridiculous things. And we gave away Radio Oxford soap, for God's sake. No, I mean, lunatic things, jars of marmalade, just stupid stuff. But I mean, we could do it with, you know, we were given the authority, you know, to do this sort of stuff. We had autonomy, and you don't have that anymore in radio. And I do think the BBC is an amazing institution. At the moment, it's the question of whether it runs out of bullets or feet first, because every time anything goes wrong, it keeps flagellating itself and going, I'm terribly sorry, we won't do this again. You go, actually, you didn't really do anything wrong. You know, you got this wrong, you got that wrong. But in comparison to the number of mistakes that the tabloids make on a daily basis and no one castigates them, you know, you are actually one of the most reliable news organizations in Britain, if not the world. So, you know, stand up for yourself. say, we're really sorry, but actually, do you know what? 99% of our journalists know exactly what they're doing and love the BBC enough to work so damn hard that they tell the truth and they balance their stories as best as possible. But unfortunately, you know, because it is publicly owned and because everyone pays for it, it seems to have this idea that it must apologize over and over again and never actually stand up and say, do you know what? We're quite good at quite a lot of stuff. So that's changed really. And I although I still love radio, I haven't done it in a long time, and it has begun to change as well. I mean, when I was very, very young and I used to do radio, it used to still be CDs, or indeed I started on vinyl records on slip mats that you spun in, cartridges with jingles on, all that stuff you see from 1873 in Cat's Whiskers. Nowadays it's all computerized. So you have a running order when everything is linear, and you just have a big button that says go. It's a thing called Radio Man, and whoever designed Radio Man, which is installed in all BBC local radio stations, deserves to be shot, hung, drawn, and quartered, possibly as well, because it is not designed for people who are creative on radio. It's designed for somebody who just wants to go, and this is next, go, and this comes after that, go. Now, to me, being the radio presenter was about pulling in all the sort of outside sources, the grams, the jingles, the weather person, a few tapes, and mixing them all together, which is what I love doing. I mean, I was inspired by Kenny Everett, and Kenny used to do all of these amazing post-production stuff that he'd then feed into the show, multi-tracking himself, singing jingles and so on. And I loved that. I was absolutely passionate about that. Him and Noel Edmonds and Crinkly Bottom. Noel was, I think, better on the radio than he was on telly. And there's a lot of people are critical of Noel and now as to the sort of superstar he's become and how he's can appear somewhat arrogant on occasions. But actually, he was a brilliant, brilliant radio presenter because he was so creative and imaginative. And I don't know how you get hold of any of his Sunday morning Radio 1 programs when he did it live from Crinkly Bottom, and Brian Perkins, the Radio 4 newsreader, was his butler. It was hilarious. It was genius on a plate. And I wanted to create some of that. And I wrote my own radio serials when I was in my very early 20s. We did Group Captain Briggles of the RAF. And he had a campaign to search for the only aeroplane loo that would remain operational in a loop-the-loop situation. And we also did a series called, which didn't take off quite as well, which was Chublock Holmes. Chublock Holmes and the Amazing Dr. Watsoff and the Search for the Lemon Entry. So I wrote all these things, and I listen back now, and they're absolutely appalling. But we got them voiced by all sorts of other people within the radio station, and I had an absolute ball pulling it together. So that was why I loved radio, because there were no boundaries. There were absolutely no boundaries. And here is the other lovely thing about radio. In radio, your audience is here. Your ear is here. There's very little that can get in here. The producer can't. There's not a lot that can happen when you have that direct connection with your audience. Television, you need to be at least 6 feet away from your audience to project yourself into the camera, because otherwise the camera can't see you. You've got to stand that far back. And the interesting thing is when you meet presenters, there are very few who are good on both radio and television. They tend to be good at one or the other. They can sometimes do both. Chris Evans is an example of someone who can do both. And funnily enough, Chris and I both started the same way. We both started as Timmy Mallett's gopher. There you go. I've been back in touch with Timmy Mallett quite recently because he doesn't live that far from me. And it's been a very interesting renewal of a very old friendship. But we both started, and Timmy was great because Timmy was creative and he liked to involve people. He kind of used and abused people, but he knew that people wanted to be involved with his programs, and he gave them the opportunity. And he invented characters for them. Mine was Mr. Wigglenukle, the salesman from Useless Tranioid Products. And I somewhere I've probably still got a few scripts somewhere. But was it Nobby No Mates? I think was Chris Evans. It was, or Nobby No Levels. Sorry, Nobby No Levels. That was it. And it was a similar sort of thing of getting somebody on air and encouraging them to have fun and be creative. So that's why I love radio over and above television. I mean, in fact, I spent today doing a rather serious report on the International Maritime Organization for a company. So I can do the serious news reporting when I have to. But actually the most fun is being creative and playing around and being silly with radio. And BBC doesn't really let you do that anymore.
No, I suppose it's the way that the world is now, isn't it? Because everyone, you can't say certain things and you can't do certain things. Because I grew up with Chris Moyles on the breakfast show. Like, I absolutely loved it. Him and Comedy Dave.
Why did you love it, Tom?
Because he was just, the games they would play, they were just lots of banter between them. They just have a good laugh. Like, they knew, like you say, they knew how to draw their audience in. So every morning before school, Moyles, he was on straight away every morning. I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
And what did that do to your mood before you went to school?
I felt happy. I'm quite a positive person anyway. I live for the moment. I'm a very happy-go-lucky person. But Moyles, I was always like, let's start the day. Yeah. Don't need breakfast. I need Chris Moyles.
So occasionally I talk to sort of 16, 17-year-olds because of the virtue of having a certain kudos about my voice. They will actually listen to me for 10 minutes as opposed to 2, where a 50-year-old male turned up and said, I'm now going to talk to you about the most powerful instrument you will ever play. And I go, oh, God, really? Yes, all active in this room, you have to listen to me. That's what your teacher has said. But no, they actually do tend to listen because I've got some interesting stories. And it is interesting explaining that to people because we talk about silly little things you may not have thought of. So you just go, if you are running a radio station, who do you put on your breakfast show and who do you put on your midnight show? On your breakfast show, you put the lively person who's, hey, because you don't want somebody to go, oh, I've had a terrible day so far. It's only going to get worse. Who wants to get up to that? Yeah, at midnight, you don't want somebody saying, yeah, it's been an amazing day, fantastic, what we're going to do now for you is play this. Hi, I'm going to play you some mellow music while you drift off to sleep, or if you're driving home tonight after a long shift, stay with me. It's that sort of thing. So you use the right voices
that was beautiful
of the day. You know what I mean? As cheesy as it comes. But and when you start saying that to people, they go, oh, click, and there's a light bulb comes on and go, oh, well, now I understand a little bit more about how the media works and how the basis of it is created because of this. Because the style of that is important and it changes your mood. It is the most powerful instrument you'll ever play, and it does change the interactions. So if I turn around to Tom, and Tom's rung me up. Tom rings me on the phone, and he goes, hi, John, it's Tom. And I go, oh, hi, Tom. How's the conversation going to go?
Great, because we're happy. We're both feeding off each other, bouncing off each other.
Yeah. If I say, oh, hi, Tom.
Yeah, just like, you all right?
Yeah, what have I done? And if I say, oh, hi, Tom, probably means you owe me money.
Not again.
Oh, hi, Tom. And with that, I can change the balance of the conversation completely. And you know exactly how I feel about you having rung me up because I've given it away. Your voice gives you away all the time. So that's why it's a fascinating instrument. And it's why actually you need to learn to play it as best you can because it'll govern your life throughout. It'll govern the interactions you have, both business-wise and also personally. When somebody says, oh, when your partner turns around and says, I love you, and you go, yeah, me too. And you go, whoa, no, hang on a minute, say it with feeling. If somebody says, oh, and I love you too, then you're in the right place. But if you go, yeah, whatever, you too.
Yeah.
It's like having a conversation with my wife. Now, do my research on you. You did one job I've always admired. And I say admired in the sense of how do people do this job while keeping a straight face? And you worked for QVC when it launched here.
I was just working for QVC. I was the first presenter on air, I'll have you know.
Just how did that come about and what was that like?
It came about because I was a kind of a jobbing TV presenter as well. I wanted to do more telly than I was actually doing, and this job came up and I applied for it. And we did the very, very famous audition where, I don't know if I've got one somewhere here, but oh yeah, I've got one. So you take an HB pencil and you talk about it for 2 minutes and do your best to sell it. And it's a very famous QVC audition, and it's actually quite a good test to see how good people are simply talking about something fairly uninteresting, but whether they can sell it to you. Why did I do it? There wasn't another Selly Telly outside of America at that point. It's 1993, I know, way back in the annals of time, and nobody had ever watched television selling other than in America. QVC was quite big in America, but it had never existed in any other country anywhere. There wasn't another one. And so we had no idea what we were getting into. There were 7 of us who successfully auditioned and became the first presenters. I think I was picked because I was obviously relatively confident about just talking rubbish. I mean, radio does give you the capacity to sit and talk to yourself for 3 hours and not get put away. You don't actually know there's an audience out there. And as you've already understood, I can talk for Britain. So I can keep going for hours and hours and hours. But I also had the capacity that if you turn around to me and said, you know, something's gone, we've lost the next guest, fill. Now I will fill if you want, and I'll fill for 3 minutes and 55 seconds, and I'll take you up to the pits. Because I started so young, I learned those techniques very, very early. So in that sense, I think probably they thought I was a safe pair of hands. And the very first product, there are some pictures of it on the internet, was a Volkswagen Beetle alarm clock. And we made news at 10 that night, you know, with the clip. So yeah, it was quite potent. What has changed is if you watch QVC and indeed Ideal World and all the other channels, Chanda and so on, they all have guests with them now. Now we used to get 1 guest a week, and again I used to be quite lucky because I was used to interviewing people, so I tend to get the guests. So I did Will Carling and Bob Hope and all these, you know, luminaries who would occasionally come down and sell their products. But it wasn't very often. And the rest of the time we were trying to sell Capodimonte mushrooms. And because the product range was very limited, there were an awful lot of people saying, really selling our stuff on a channel on television we've never heard of? So the buyers had a really hard time sourcing product. But when they did source good product, it would sell. And we ended up doing, I think, 18 hours of live unscripted television a week.
Wow.
Now, if you can do that with just a bunch of products and nobody else to talk to, you know, your podcast, there's 2 of you to bounce off, even if the guest isn't particularly dynamic. But just on your own, that teaches you a whole series of skills that are incredibly valuable and really, really useful within media as a whole. So I'm very glad I did it. I couldn't manage to do it for much more than a year. Whereas the lady I started with, the lady who was, we are in the opening video, which gets rolled out fairly regularly, lovely lady called Julia Roberts. She has been there since the beginning, is the only one, not that Julia Roberts, another Julia Roberts. But she and I were the first people who turned up on the opening video. And because I'm quite a lot taller than Julia, I'm 6 foot and she's probably only 5'5", or maybe 5'6". I may be doing her disservice. But the camera angle was done on a jib as we walked in, and there's awful jingly music that comes in. And I turn around and I look at Julia, and it looks like I'm staring down her cleavage. And I can promise you I wasn't. It was the camera angle throughout. I mean, she was a very attractive woman, don't get me wrong, but I really wasn't being that misogynistic. And that then gets rolled out every kind of anniversary. And this thing just lives on. I think both Julia and I would really be quite happy if it was burnt and destroyed. It's probably digitized now somewhere, so it can go on for years.
To digitally lift your chin up.
But I know, I don't regret it. I think it was a wonderful thing to do. I think it was a very, very good training. It just wasn't something that I could continue to do day in, day out, because I think probably the range of products. Now, if you watch any of these channels, they all have a guest on every hour. And that makes a real difference to be able to interact with somebody. They're normally a product knowledge guest. So your knowledge of the product as the host doesn't need to be quite as in depth, because you can turn around and say, so what does this do, Fred? And Fred goes, oh, well, it does this. And that makes it a lot easier, because we had to spend our whole time researching the product, making notes on it, coming up with things that we could talk about. And otherwise there was deathly silence. And so if we didn't fill the airtime, nothing did.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I was going to ask if you had to go on like courses or something, or did they give you any like background? Like, oh, this is what it does. This is what it is. This is what it can do. Blah blah blah. But and obviously there was no internet back then, so you couldn't just be like, I'll just have a Google, see what and have a look.
Yeah, you had to go and find out your information. You had to go and read up. And I used to read up about Claddagh rings. We sold an awful lot of Claddagh rings, and there was a verse that I'm not sure I can still remember. The old claddagh ring, sure it was, 'twas my grandmother's. She wore it a lifetime and gave it to me. Something that was made where the claddagh runs down to the sea. And I used to reel that out every time I sell a claddagh ring. And the claddagh ring also, if you know the claddagh ring, it's a heart being grasped by two hands.
Yes,
the
I
Irish
know what it is.
ring.
Yeah.
And depending on which finger you wear it on, and whether the bottom of the heart is pointing down your finger or up your finger, that illustrates whether you're engaged or whether you're not, or whether you're with a boyfriend or whether you're not with a boyfriend, or whether you're married and whether you're not. So there are all sorts of things that go with claddagh rings. Whether they're all true or not, I honestly couldn't tell you, but that's the research I did. So yeah, we used to get things called blue cards. Here I give away all the secrets, but the secrets are 700 years old, so it's okay. The blue cards, and blue because blue is the color that shows up least on television. So when you had a card with information on it, if you put it on the desk, the camera really tended not to notice it because it was blue. And on that was typed the basic information from the buyer of the product, who basically gave us some simple stuff. But because a bit like when your news editor told you to go and interview so-and-so and here are the directions, I have a brilliant nose for directions now, because as a cub reporter, when I was sent out to interview people, the news editor has not taken down the directions very accurately because they don't have to go there. So you were the poor nincompoop that had to go and find the interviewee from some really crappy directions and figure out where you had to turn. I mean, one of them once was Michael Heseltine. I was supposed to go and interview Michael Heseltine, and the directions I got were so wrong, I ended up being about 45 minutes late. He was kind enough to still let me interview him. And it was during the Westland affair. You won't remember the Westland affair either, but this was all to do with military helicopters. And I was fascinated to see that he had a military helicopter model, radio control model, on his desk. Anyway, I digress. But in the same way, the buyer wasn't going to have to sell the product. So the notes that they made on the blue card weren't an awful lot of use. So you had to go in and you had to prep your products. In fact, you were given prep time. Scheduled that you come in and hear all the products in your eye, and you go down and you go, yeah, that's the xylophone, and how does this piano work? And it was stuff like that, and you had to learn about them. And if you hadn't researched them, then there wasn't an awful lot you could say about them. So yeah, it was hard work, but it was enjoyable.
Good. That's amazing. I can't believe online TV shopping channels are still going, to be honest, because obviously
everything's the biggest seller of jewelry in the UK.
Really?
The biggest seller of jewelry in the UK, do not doubt it. And what's happened now, if you look at some of the people who are selling their stuff on QVC, well-known Hollywood stars have realized the potential of QVC. They wouldn't do it if they didn't get the sales.
Wow.
Fair play.
That's blown my mind a little bit, to be honest with you.
Oh, yeah. Go and take a look at the company accounts. You might revise your opinion.
So, also, what I thought was awesome was that obviously you were part of Blood Sugar by Pendulum. That is incredible.
By default.
Yeah.
By default, I hasten to add, because you're now getting onto the subject of the fact that my voice was used for what is called a TTS, text-to-speech system. And it is therefore licensable as a voice called Daniel. And that's what Pendulum did. Pendulum licensed the voice and got it to say various rude things, which I have since on TikTok I have illustrated, because there's an awful lot of people out there who love Blood Sugar by Pendulum. It's much bigger than I ever thought it was. I was a huge hit in the clubs for years and knew nothing about it. I'm really not much of a clubber, so.
I was gonna say, we'll get on to the whole Siri stuff and whatnot, but with that, you must have done so many things and have no idea about it. It
totally.
must be so surreal to find. How did you even discover about the song?
Do you know, I honestly can't remember, but I do remember, I set up a voiceover agency in 1996 with my brother. And I do remember sitting there talking to the agents that I employed, because I was on my own books. It's quite difficult, in fact, as a voiceover, when you have a voiceover agency. In some ways, you don't want to be on your own books because you don't want to ever be accused of going, yeah, that's a lovely job, I'll have that. Or, answering the phone and going, oh, yes, I think Jon Briggs might be the best voice for that. I'll see if he's free. Yes, he's free. because you're representing 200 other people as well, and of course their livelihoods and their jobs are absolutely, if not more important than your own. So in fact, I never really answered the phones. I employed agents who answered the phones for me. But there is a dichotomy in that, because if you're not on your own agency books, people turn around and say, well, you can't think your agency is much good. You're not even on your own books. And in fact, when we started it, we had Johnny Walker. Johnny Walker joined us, and I was still represented by my previous agents. I hadn't put myself on my own books because I wasn't sure whether it was the right thing to do. And Johnny Walker turned around and said, well, you can't think much. If I don't know why I'm joining your agency, because you're not even on your own books. So you said, clearly you don't care about it. And I thought, oh God, well, probably I do need to be on my own books to show that I do believe in it. And I did, absolutely. We set it up because I'm one of these people who can't half-ass things. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it 100%. I don't believe in these people who turn around, I'm going to do it for 110%. You can't do anything for 110%. 100% is the maximum you can do. But if I am going to do something, I am going to do it 100%. And I'm going to try and do it better than anybody else as well. There's no point otherwise. And that makes life slightly difficult for me on occasions, but it's worthwhile, I think, trying to strive for the best that you can possibly be. You might miss, but at least you tried. And so that's, the agency was a big part of my life, and I sold it last year, in fact. So for 25 years, I looked after it. And I'm very proud of it as well. I'm proud that it was so successful to be able to set up a business. And if anybody who's watching this has ever done this, they'll know the pride in it. Set up a business that you believe in, run it successfully without any debts for 25 years, and then sell it to somebody who thinks that business is worth paying money to take over, is a wonderful squaring of the circle. I really recommend it to anyone, because it does actually think, I did something quite good. I was successful in that all the way through. And most businesses, when they start, tend to fail within the next 6 months or so. So that's something I am quite proud of, if anyone's listing things that I think I've done well. But I do remember sitting down with the agents and going, have you heard this thing? Surely if they're going to license my voice, they shouldn't therefore be able to then make money out of using my voice without paying me something. So we did have quite a long discussion. I think we did contact the management of Pendulum, and I think they basically told us where to go. So, sometimes you just have to go, oh, what the hell? It's the way it is. Because when you record the system, you get paid a one-off fee. People sometimes say, you get paid every time, this voice appears. And you go, do you think I'd be sitting here having this conversation with you if we'd be on a yacht in Barbados? So, but I know, looking back on it now, as with most things, as happens with hindsight, when you get very, very old, you tend to sit there and go, oh, well, that was a jolly jape, wasn't it? And I'm quite fond of the fact that it's out there, and it makes me swear, which I've never done.
Wonderful.
Sorry, I apologize. My phone is pinging. I will stick it on silent. That's very unprofessional.
Yes, it is, Mr. Briggs. What are you doing? I'm joking. It's absolutely fine. No worries at all. But how? I'd probably through radio, I imagine. But how did you find that your voice? Because it's iconic. I'm not gonna lie. Your voice is iconic. It really. The amount of stuff when I was doing my research, is like, of course he did that. Because I was going back to it, going, yes, I remember that as well. Like Pro Evolution Soccer. First game of that. I can now remember hearing the names in my head just with your voice. It's crazy.
That's just a big mistake, really, because sports commentary is really not my bag. But I think it's interesting. We used to talk about a soundtrack to your life, and we all have one. It's made up of the voices that you knew on the radio, the people who were presenters at the time. Which is why I think constant presenters on TV channels are kind of important, really, although people begin to dismiss them now because people are receiving their news in very, very different ways. So viewership has gone down and down and down. Radio is still riding quite high, which is very lovely to see, because I think the beauty of radio, and indeed podcasts, is, you can do something else while the podcast is on. I mean, clearly, if you're watching this right now, you are glued to our physogs and watching us as we are animated.
Great word.
But you could actually enjoy this without necessarily having to see our beautiful faces. And I think, there is an element to which voices do form a part of your memories and like smells and sounds and all these other things that provoke memories. They remind you of particular instances in your life. And I suppose my voice does fit into an element of that. It does fit into the soundtrack element of people's lives. But then I've been very lucky to be around at a time when there weren't that many announcers on television or newsreaders or program presenters. And I also come into that rather strange category of named voiceovers of TV programs you like. And that's probably only about a dozen to half a dozen of the voices. People like Peter Dixon, the voice of X Factor, Rachel Adedeji. You've also got Dave Lamb, who's the voice of Come Dine With Me and a great scriptwriter as well, and a very good impressionist. The lovely Mitch Johnson. Mitch Johnson does so many of the voices that you would be surprised that he's on Dead Ringers if you have any doubt about him, on Radio 4 on a Friday night at the moment. Who else do you have? I mean, you have people like Graham Bannerman, who used to be the voice of Blind Date. These are all recognizable named voices who you can come across. Marcus Bentley, voice of Big Brother, again, another iconic voice. They're all there, and you kind of recognize them and you know them. Perhaps you might not know their names, but it is only about 7 or 8. Alan Dedicoat, the voice of the Bulls, the voice of the Lottery Bulls, and in fact, Alan and I sound very similar a lot of the time. Release those big money balls.
That was spot on.
But actually, Alan and I were both Radio 2 newsreaders. Alan was a staff newsreader and was the senior announcer, as was known. I was merely a freelance. But for about 2 years, we both voiced BBC One and BBC Two promos. So we'd turn up to Television Centre and we'd go through all the promotions. And here's a fact from the archives from you. I'm not sure necessarily we were the best voices for it, but we were quite recognizable. But what we did have was the capacity to repeat what we had just done 5 times. Why, you may ask? Well, it's because back in those days, everything was recorded on 1-inch tape. There were people in the vaults of Television Centre who were running in the VTs. Now, of course, it's all digital and it's instant start. But you remember the little clocks you'd occasionally see, which would be running, and you get 5, 4, and then it goes blank for 3 seconds, and then the program starts. So occasionally, if you mistimed it, you get to see the clock. But that's because in the gallery for any program, when you were running a VT, there was a count. And the skill of any TV presenter was that you hear the count in your ear and you'd be able to read either the autocue or speak to the 0, and then the VT would start. Even within promos, we had to be able to do everything on VT, videotape. So it meant that we had to do the next Friday, the tomorrow, the in half an hour versions. We had to do all those over and over again. Digitally now, of course, you record it and you just drop it in 5 times. But in those days, you had to repeat it 5 times, getting your voice very often in the gaps between the speech that was actually on the VT from somebody saying, "I name you, you murderer," and Thursday on BBC One, "Yes, it was me." You'll find it's that was what was going on. And your script was supposed to fit in the gaps when somebody was going, "No, Marjorie," because the skill was not constant for everybody. It was not everybody could do that, but Alan and I, were able to fashion it such. You told us to do it once, we would reproduce it 5 times. It meant they spent less time in the gallery. It wasn't that we were necessarily the right voices for it. It just meant that Briggs and Dedicoat, they can just do it. They'll run it. So we'll do comedy, we'll do news, we'll do sport, we'll do drama. They can do all of them. And comedy is light-hearted and news is hard-hitting and direct. But you would do the whole panoply of it. Now they have a different voice for every promo. But in those days, we did them all. And it was because we could reproduce it 5 times on the trot.
Stunning.
So you're probably most famous for doing the voiceover on The Weakest Link. No.
Yeah, probably. I mean, it's either that or Siri, isn't it?
It's either that or Siri, yeah. How did this role of Statman Jon, which I love, come about? Did you audition? Did they seek you out from like the radio work or the voiceover you were already doing for BBC? Or
I still don't know where it came from. It turned up in 2000, so it's 21 years ago.
Oh wow!
And it turned up in 2000 when my voiceover career was perhaps beginning to decline a little bit. And that was probably because I'm what's called received pronunciation. I'm very RP. I speak the Queen's English, whereas an awful lot of northern or just regional accents, it wasn't specifically northern, but regional accents were being sought out and used on adverts, narrations, and indeed, beginning to emerge into continuity suites in television as well. So I think received pronunciation was regarded as being outdated. It was a very, very old-fashioned way of speaking, and it's the way the BBC used to speak in the 1940s. There is a wonderful, seek it out. There's a wonderful video with the chief announcer of the BBC talking to a man called Jon Snag, and Jon Snag is the official BBC radio newsreader. And he's talking about how they had thought about getting the news read by a northern voice, but actually it doesn't really work. And here's an example of why. And they have a northern chap reading the news and then goes, and as you can hear, some people like it, but the majority don't. And you're listening to it and going, what are you talking about? There's nothing wrong. That was perfectly clear. And it was so divisive and so divisionist. That northern people really couldn't read the news. I mean, let's face it, they didn't like women reading the news either up until the very early 1970s, when the likes of Selena and Angela Rippon turned up. Can you imagine that now? Can you imagine people go, I'm sorry, women can't read the news because they don't sound serious enough on the serious stories. That was what people believed. And it's not that long ago that's the way it was perceived and understood. It's just, that it takes a long time to change those divisions once you start inserting them. So as I say, I was kind of, I was RP and it probably sounded a bit old-fashioned. And I was thinking perhaps, voiceover, and I've been very lucky because I have fingers in all sorts of pies. If I'm not doing radio, I'm not doing TV, I'm not doing voiceovers, then I'm probably writing and I'm training and so on and so forth. So trust me, I have been truly, truly blessed, and I absolutely know that fact. But they rang up and said, did you want to be the voice of a BBC Two, a daytime quiz show? My first reaction was, oh my God, another nail in the coffin of my career. Because we didn't know what it was, we didn't know what it was going to be, and it was Anne Robinson's going to present this thing, and we had no idea that it was going to take off in the way it did. I'm sure Annie would say the same. I don't think she knew that it was going to have the impact that it did. What happened, of course, was it was in July, August 2000 that we launched. We were the only thing on that was not the Sydney 2000 Olympics. That's why we got an audience to begin with. And when you have an opportunity like that, everyone went, oh God, something that's not sport, please. And they started watching The Weakest Link. And there was this quiz show that was really quite unusual, because instead of saying, oh, Jamie, you didn't know the capital of France is Paris, but never mind, you played really well, just went, you don't know the capital of France is Paris, you're thick. And that was the effective idea behind it. I mean, people have spoken to me, have written theses on The Weakest Link and why it works. And I always say it's because the first quiz show that turned around and went, you're stupid. Get it? Why are you here? It's a general knowledge quiz. Why enter a general knowledge quiz if you don't have any? So that's where it started. And that's why people kind of liked it, because A, it was different, and B, it wasn't sport. So we built an audience really quite quickly, and we went from BBC Two onto BBC One, and we then went on to Saturday night, primetime BBC One, big boys stuff, big boy pads. So we were very, very lucky, and we did 1,870 odd episodes. There were only 2 that I didn't do.
Really?
And they were the Eurovision version, which they got lovely Terry, much missed Mr. Wogan.
Okay.
We do miss Terry. He was a broadcasting genius, if you ever listened to any of his work. And the genius of Mr. Wogan was he knew that his audience were funnier than he was, and he got the audience to write the show. He just read it. It was pure genius. And the other one they did, which I've never understood why, and I still feel slightly resentful, was the version they did with The Apprentice, when they had the bloke from The Apprentice, who was the voice of The Apprentice, who doesn't actually, on occasions, I thought it would be a good idea to get all these kind of well-known voices together and perhaps do an Edinburgh show or something like that. He was the only chap, and I won't name him, but he was the only chap who didn't want to take part because he said it wasn't really a very important part of his career.
What?
How rude.
That's a genius idea.
Well, it was quite a nice idea, but harder these days to do. But maybe one day. I've actually got a one-man show that I'm wanting to do with Siri, but I can't tell you any more than that. And we were planning to do it last year, prepare it last year for Edinburgh this year, but of course that's not happening. But maybe if it's been written with a comedy writer, and we've written probably about a third of it, and it's quite good. It's quite good so far, but I've got to try and play with it a bit more, and maybe if I get the encouragement, I'll still manage to pull it out the back.
So, since you brought it up, let's talk about it, shall we?
What, the elephant in the room?
Yeah, let's just get, because the whole time we've been talking, John, all I've heard is like, is my phone talking to me? Because it's just some of the way you pronounce things. I'm like, it's just awesome. I love it because obviously your voice is everywhere, literally on every Apple device.
Well, it is. I mean, got to remember that there's an awful lot of Android devices out there, and they haven't got a clue what we're about to talk about.
Yeah, it's absolutely fine. But basically, are.
Jamie's hiding his head. Are you an Android user?
I might be.
Yeah, tell him to kindly leave the clip now.
You disappoint me, sir.
Yeah. This is just Tom and me, okay?
I can't believe Siri just told me to walk off a cliff.
That's one of those quotations that you give as a child. To saying, no, you always do what Siri tells you. If Siri told you to walk off a cliff, would you? Anyway, sorry, carry on.
No, that's absolutely fine. But basically, so how did this happen? How did you become the voice of Siri?
Same thing as the weakest link. I mean, it was, I honestly don't know. And we'd recorded the TTS system, the text-to-speech system, a couple of years earlier, and it wasn't for Apple. It was for a company called Scansoft, and they're an American company, and they basically licensed it. Doing a TTS system is incredibly complicated, unbelievably complicated, and even Apple, with their zillions, didn't want to commit to having created their own to begin with, because Siri was relatively experimental at the beginning. Here's this artificial assistant, and there are people who have created artificial personal assistants that have fallen by the wayside. I mean, do you remember Microsoft's Cortana?
Yep.
It's gone, doesn't exist anymore, because it's very difficult and expensive to maintain it when there are better systems around. And the top system at the moment is Alexa. I can't say it because she's going to wake up, because I do have one just sitting there.
I'm glad I got headphones on.
The system that has been created for that is unbelievably prescient and clever. Siri really needs to do some catching up, and Apple keep promising that they're going to do that. And I think they probably will, because they've invested a lot of time and energy and money in it. And it is pretty useful, but it's nowhere near as clever and understands much less than Alexa, because it's just not as well developed. But we did the recording back then. There were 4 voices that were licensed off the shelf from the same sort of recordings as I did. 3 of them were female, 1 of them was male, and that was me to this day. I have no idea why. There was 1 male voice, but maybe it was part of the experiment to see which works best. Susan Bennett was the American one, who's a lovely lady who I've met. In fact, we have recorded an interview, and I'm being very lax, and I should really put it on YouTube so that people can watch it, but I just haven't got down to editing it. And there was an Australian, and there was a German as well. Why it was thought that the British public needed a male voice, a sort of no nonsense James Bond without the girls or the guns, I suppose. I don't know, but that was the way it worked, and I was oblivious to it. So I do think there's a temptation that people went, the voice of Siri was a job offered to you, and of course you would have taken it. It really wasn't like that. It's pure chance, pure accident. I know my voice works quite well for a TTS system because there's a constant timbre to it, but I couldn't have told you why it was chosen. I'm jolly chuffed it was, but no, I don't know much more about it than that.
How long did it take to record all the different bits and pieces? Because obviously they put all the jokes and stuff in, didn't they? Like Who Let the Dogs Out, I think was
I
one.
was going to say, I've lost count the amount of times I've asked you who let the dogs out.
I mean, the answer, of course, to that, Tom, is recording the system was the important bit. The rest of it, I've never said. I've never said who let the dogs out. I've never said who. What I've said is a whole bunch of sentences that gave people the phonemes, the little sounds where consonant meets consonant, consonant meets vowel, vowel meets consonant, and vowel meets vowel. Those are the things that they require to chop up and then put back together to create the sentences. Now, remember that language isn't about words. Language is not about words. If I speak to you in a foreign language that you don't know, all you hear is a bunch of sounds. You can't tell where one word ends and one word begins. So when you create language, you just have to recreate the sounds. It's us who are intelligent who are doing the dividing up of the words because we know how to speak the language. So it's reliant on our intelligence to decipher the sounds. Speech is an incredible thing. The very fact that I'm sitting here making noises to you that express opinions, ideas, emotions, all sorts of things to you right now that you are imbibing and maybe sitting there saying it's a load of tosh, I'm never going to listen to it again. But hopefully our conversation means that I've transferred information to you, you've transferred information to me, and we are wiser and better and more entertained as a result. That is why human speech is so amazing. And the process of doing it is because we are unbelievably clever and we have a huge processing system in our heads that manages to learn a language, if not more than one. And the interesting thing is we learn our mother tongue with one side of our brain, but any languages we learn after that, we learn with the other side of the brain. So our mother tongue is incredibly important to us. And that process of communication, which is absolutely vital to us, because as a baby, as a child, it means we get our needs met better than simply bawling our heads off. And we realize that we only do it by listening to our parents and the people who speak to us. That is how we learn. And we get an understanding and a reaction. The moment we produce a word, somebody reacts to it. And once we have the understanding and the meaning of that word, we build that vocabulary so we can ask for more things. We can get more succor, we can get more understanding, we can get more of the things we want, we can have more problems solved for us as we grow. So language is a really, really interesting process. But it is still a series of sounds in the same way that a dog or a monkey is making a series of sounds. Their sounds are just much more limited and far less extensive in terms of a vocabulary, but they're still doing the same thing that other dogs or other baboons or monkeys or whatever recognize and can translate. So that is what you're doing right now. You're translating the sounds that I'm making. To reproduce that, what you've got to be able to do is divide all the phonemes up and go, this word needs these phonemes, putting it in this order. However, it's not quite as simple as that. If I say to you both, my next project is to learn how to project my voice. As far as a computer is concerned, if you type that in there, there are two words there that are identical. So you have to let the computer synthesis system, speech synthesis system, which isn't that easy to say, you have to teach it that the emphasis is different depending on where the word comes in the sentence and whether it is a verb or a noun, projects and project. So that's just a minor illustration of how difficult the system is, and probably one of the primary reasons why Apple went, look, let's just license it off the shelf to start off with. We were all pretty well-known voices. That was the other problem that then occurred. So we were relatively well-known voices anyway, and we got identified quite quickly. And although Apple would never want to say, yes, it's you, they knew that was the case. And that causes a problem for a very valuable brand like Apple, which is, if one of us turns out to be a murderer or, just to live off a diet of nothing other than banana and cream sandwiches, we rather damage the brand because we're a bit weird, or even worse than that, we're dangerous. So to disassociate themselves from known names was quite understandable. And I love the fact that Daniel is still there as the default voice that is pulled through for any system that reads speech on an iPhone in the UK. And I secretly hope that there's a little person in Palo Alto going, he's all right, he's a bit of a show-off, and he does talk about Siri, but he's still quite a good voice. So we'll keep him for the time being.
Did you ever look at that and go, Daniel, that's not my fucking name. My name's John.
Yeah, no, I think they definitely had to just. I don't know. I'm not sure it's a Daniel voice. I don't know what a Daniel might sound like. I mean, you kind of know what a Kevin might sound like, or I really shouldn't say things like that. But Sylvester. Sylvester. We know what a Sylvester would sound. Why wasn't they called Sylvester instead of Daniel? I don't know. Why Daniel? Very biblical.
It is too.
I've had you the entire time. I've never changed your voice because I've loved it. But obviously, again, it's one of those moments where I was like, why do I know this voice from? And obviously, there you go.
Great so.
So
yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of sat nav systems, and there are from my friends who have navigated their way around Spain or France, going, couldn't bloody get rid of you. Leave us alone. We want a holiday without you.
So how did you find out about it then? If they just licensed it off the shelf from somewhere else?
Well, if you've read what I've spoken about before, I mean, it was completely by accident. I happened to be dating one of the presenters of BBC Breakfast, so I at that time, which I'm not now, and I watched BBC Breakfast fairly regularly, and there was this the technology correspondent, Rory Cleflin-Jones, and he said, and now it comes with this personal assistant, and if you press the button, and I thought, I recognize that voice. And that was it. That's how I knew. So
it's amazing.
Unconsulted.
Wow.
Straight down the shop. Give me a fucking iPhone. I need to find this out.
I can't remember when I first got that. I mean, I'm a nerd anyway when it comes to gadgets. I'm an early adopter. I mean, the drawers behind me now over there, they're full of old gadgets, busily decaying because they are no longer valid. It's not quite true. I've had a big clear out quite recently, but there are bits of plastic just going mouldy in there because I bought the thing in 1822 and it never turned out to be any good after all.
Do you always find like loads of wires and plugs and chargers? Like, I have no idea what goes with what.
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thank God you can't see the desk in front of me now, which is covered in wires and bits and stuff.
So I know if I was the voice of Siri, I would have the most bizarre conversations with myself. Have you ever done that? Have you ever gotten drunk and had a weird conversation with yourself, John?
Oh, really? I mean, there are a few things. As I said, I've taken to TikTok recently, and I've been doing TikToks where I argue with myself as Siri. So if you want to look up on TikTok at Voice of Siri, there are a few videos on there which I've put together, which are quite good fun.
That's amazing.
So I quite like that capacity. Because I'm the only person in the world that can do that. So if it's a unique possibility, I'm probably going to try and utilize it. And it is what's behind the idea of the Edinburgh show.
I really hope that happens. I'm really intrigued by that.
But you've got to remember, I've been so used to hearing my own voice for years and years and years because of starting in radio. So you recognize the timbre of your voice. So I used to be able to do it when I was doing BBC One and BBC Two promos regularly, and the television would be on the other room. I would pick up the timbre of it because it's just so recognizable to me. I know when I hear the frequency of my own voice. That doesn't mean to say I sit there and go, oh, yes, lovely. Please tell me. Oh, yes. Oh, I love it. Let me rejoice and roll around on the carpet. It is part of the job. I don't think you can do radio. And there are people who go, oh, I can't watch myself. Actors who do that. Well, I can't listen to myself. I don't think you get better unless you do. I think you have to listen to things that you've done to say, I could have done that better. The danger is you sit and go, oh, I sound rather sexy and wonderful, don't I? And a fabulous voiceover coach by the name of Maurice Tobias that we used to employ for the agency used to talk about not doing voiceovers with your headphones on because it was, she described it as like having lunch with yourself. Because you're sitting there going, oh, gosh, I'm sounding, I really love that. Oh. So you take them off, you don't have that interaction with your own voice, which is quite important. But you have to listen back to it. You can't pretend that it, be all self-deprecatory, as it were, and say, no, I never listen to myself. I think you have to. I'm a big fan of spending time looking at and listening to things to see, could I have done that better? So I spent today with a cameraman who I love. He's my favorite guy to work with. because I know this lovely guy will turn around and say, you can do that better. So I had a couple of pieces to camera to record today, and he was the one to turn around and say, yeah, you slipped up on that word, when I would have gone, yeah, that's in the bag. No, you slipped up on whatever it was I said, and it makes me do it again. So having somebody who understands what you can do, it's a really interesting aspect of this. And just divert, if I may, into this idea of when people are presenters on air. When I've done a radio show, or indeed a TV show for that matter, it's like driving a car. I've driven the car from A to B. You've watched the car go past. I haven't. I've been inside. All I've seen is the dashboard and your smiling faces as I drive past. But I haven't actually seen what it looked like from the outside. So that's the difficulty of doing radio. Is it's very public. You know if I've had a good or a bad day at work, because you can hear if I screwed it up. And I'd come back to my mate Bob Harris. I mean, I used to go and see Bob. I was still at school. I'd go to school, run up to see him at the radio station afterwards while I was doing my A-levels. My grades were atrocious because I spent so much time at the radio station. And Bob would say, how's it sounding? How's it sounding, John? Because he knew that I knew what he was capable of. And I'd be saying, it's great. He said, I'm not shouting. I don't think it's quite. I said, Bob, when you do a good show, it's great. When you do an ordinary show, it's still good because you are that much of a professional. But you have to learn to trust people as a yardstick. Now, of course, there are people who go, oh, you were amazing. I loved it. It was fantastic. You did great. Oh, I loved listening to you. And there are other people who go, you were total shit. You sound like Alan Partridge on a bad day. Believe me, I've had that. I've actually had that. And you have to learn to go, actually, neither of those is correct. Because somewhere in the middle, there is somebody who knows what you are capable of. The more you do it, the more you know what you're capable of as well. I can come on and go, I screwed that up. I really didn't have a good day today. I got the timings wrong. I didn't do this right. I didn't do that right. When I used to do Night Ride for Radio 2, I'd always pre-record my opening link. So I hit the voiceover absolutely spot on because I hated crashing the vocals on the first record I played. It would always give the show a bad start. So I'd always pre-record it on a piece of tape back in those days because it was when we were listening on Cat's Whiskers. And therefore I knew the opening to the show was great because I timed it perfectly. And if I didn't, I'd go back and do it again until I got it right. You finish going, and here's the Bee Gees, and then they sing. That's a really tight voiceover, and that's what you should be able to do if you're a decent radio presenter. But if you did get it wrong, it got everything off on a bad kilter. Everything was kind of slightly shaky after that. So I always like to pre-record the opening link. It's about understanding where that yardstick is and going to somebody who knows who you are and going, was that okay? Could I have done that any better? And somebody who you trust goes, yeah, you were really good today. Sounded really, really nice. I think it was one of your best shows. And you go, okay, nailed it. Because that then does help you go, yeah, this is what it felt like inside. And this is therefore how I heard it outside or what other people heard outside. It's actually the trick of being a voiceover. Voiceover isn't simply about having a good voice and reading aloud. It's about being able to hear internally what people are hearing externally. And now if you record your voice and you hear it back, you go, well, that doesn't sound like me. But who is that person? I don't know. You don't hear yourself like everybody else hears you. And the reason for that is, particularly as there are three guys here, we have deep voices, the resonance, if you just hold your throat hair, you'll feel the vibrations from your vocal cords. The reason we have an Adam's apple is because we have deeper voices than women. The Adam's apple allows you to extend the vocal cords, making them deeper. Now, that vibration not only extends from the throat area, but it also extends in the jaw area. We know that the edges of our jaw are right up next to our eardrums. Therefore, we are hearing ourselves slightly through the vibration of our jaw and our skull, which is why internally it sounds different to what we hear when we hear a playback of our own voice. You add to that the fact that the process of listening to yourself is very, very difficult to do when it's live. The only way you can do it is to cup your hands behind your ears to act as reflectors. And if you then speak, you'll get a much better idea of what the real sound of your voice is like. And it's quite uncanny sometimes. You can have a play with that when we're done. But that's the way to hear yourself as others hear you.
I'm wondering how many people that listen to the show are currently pausing it so they can talk like they're not.
Try it, because it's how it happens. But we don't hear each other. So the trick of a voiceover is to be able to know what you have to hear inside to make the outside effect work. And it's not something that many people talk about. They all think it's about being able to read the script. It's not. It's about doing that, and it's also about lifting the words off the page, so that the words that have been written by someone who isn't you are making them sound like they're your own. But yes, just to finish off, the fact is you need a decent yardstick when you're presenting on radio. You need to have an understanding of what it has sounded like to be able to get any better. One of the things the BBC is atrocious at is talent management. If you think about how they deal with talent, we mentioned Jonathan Ross. You can also mention Jeremy Clarkson. You can mention Danny Baker as well. These are all people who are complete mavericks. They're not like you and I. They think differently. Their brains work in a different way. And the problem is that the BBC hires these people and expects them to work in the same way as you and I, and they don't. They need to be looked after by producers and a team who understand that they're unusual and they are different, which is why it then conflicts, because dear old auntie and her non-flexible britches means that they come into contact and there is friction with the powers that be, because they say something or they do something which is unpalatable to them. But because they don't spend any time actually going back over the work with them and going, can we have a listen to that? I'd really love to get your feedback on how you think about that and how we could possibly support you more when you're doing a bit more of that. And it might be the talent turns around and says, I don't need any support, thank you. Perfectly okay as I am. That's fine. But actually, most talent wants to hear whether there's things they could do better. And the BBC spends no time with its on-air talent reviewing things and then asking, how can we support you? What can we do to work on this area which will polish you? It's not about correction. It's about polishing somebody so they shine even more, so they're even better at their job. The BBC kind of expects people to learn on the job and to be kind of the complete article before they even start. And that's really, really difficult. To find new talent is quite easy. There's a wealth of it there, but you need to help it develop. And the BBC doesn't want to do that because it got caught up in this ratings challenge where it turns around and needs to have people who immediately become acceptable to the audience, because if you put Chris Evans on the show, people will watch. Well, do you know what? You could put in Fred Bloggs, who has the potential to be a Chris Evans, and encourage him, and the audience would still build. And the beauty of being a public broadcaster is you don't need to be commercial from the word go. You don't need to make the money, whereas ITV and the others have to employ people who are commercially going to bring in the audiences because they can charge more money the more popular a program is. The BBC doesn't have to. It could be a much, much better breeder of talent than it is, and wouldn't have to do this process of exposing the pay scales that they pay to certain presenters over £150,000, which is enormously embarrassing for the talent anyway, enormously unfair. And one of the reasons Chris Evans left and went to Virgin, and indeed Graham Norton, I suspect, is because they have a right to privacy about what they earn. They don't have to declare it, and the BBC has betrayed them by doing it, and could have managed it much better by simply investing more time in talent management. It is simple to do, and it's terribly beneficial, because talent, no matter what you might think of it, is at the heart, it has an ego. The process of being on air is an extension of one's own ego, and egos are quite fragile for a lot of people, not all by any manner of means. But a lot of egos can be fragile, particularly when under duress and under the exposure that they get now with social media around the place.
Yeah, I think you need somebody, like you were saying before with Bob Harris and stuff, you need somebody to be able to tell you that was good, but this part wasn't, because otherwise you're going to keep going and going, well, that was great, because everyone keeps telling me it's great, so I could do it again. But obviously that's not how it's coming across. So yeah, you need someone to balance that and go, that was fantastic, great start, but in the middle you slipped up a little bit there, that wasn't so great, but the end is also fantastic. So
most established talent will be able to do that rating anyway. But people trust their producers really well. And being a producer is a really tough job. It's a job I never wanted to do. I think it's the ability to lead from the back. It's really hard, and I think I can count the number of really brilliant producers on the fingers of one hand that I've worked with in 40 odd years, because they got out of me something that I didn't think was within me in the first place. it's a really, really difficult thing to do. But those that succeed, you love working with them because you trust them implicitly.
Yeah. Awesome. So, right, you're also a podcaster yourself with three glorious shows that you have going on at the moment. One that I would definitely be subscribing to.
Saying they're glorious.
You're very welcome.
But no, they've been intriguing. I started it because it was in lockdown, and 75% of the work that I had been doing had just been ripped away from me. Thank you, Boris. I do a lot of live events, so I did a lot of conferences, I do a lot of award ceremonies and so on, but that all disappeared overnight. The event industry is probably the Paris and the Romeo and Juliet of this lockdown. Really, the one person who suffered the most and is never recognized for it. I mean, Romeo and Juliet is really the tragedy of Paris, in effect. And the event industry is that character, has not been looked after, has not been nodded towards. It takes hundreds of people to put an event on, people who are coordinating exactly what will happen on stage, building the stage, building the lighting, operating the lighting, calling the show. These are all people who haven't had a job for, I don't know how long. I've got a couple of events penciled for November. That's the earliest, and it's unlike hospitality, which can start up pretty much like that if you give them a couple of days notice. Events can't because you need a lead up to, A, start the event, B, publicize it so that people can then book the tickets and then turn up to it, and in the meantime, particularly if you're doing award ceremonies, you've got to get entrants and judges and all these other things. They take months and months of planning. Most events that are annual start planning the day after the event has finished. They're planning next year's, if not before. And the government has just ignored them totally. So, that area of my work disappeared, and I decided that I was going to do podcasts because, it's radio and I'm okay at radio. So I did one. My first instinct was because everyone can now be a broadcaster with one of these. We can go on air now, live, and broadcast to the whole of the world. Now, when I started 40 odd years ago, you needed a TV or a radio station to do that. And then very often you're only broadcasting to, little Cuddling on the Sly or little middle of Nowheresville. And it wasn't necessarily, it might have been national, which I did a fair amount of national radio and TV, but it certainly wasn't global. Well, that's global now. Podcasts are global. Anyone can tune in. So that's the joy of them. And they also stay there. Radio broadcasts disappear. I mean, I know they can be recorded or indeed turn up as podcasts themselves these days, but beforehand, they just used to be out there on the ether, never to be repeated again. And I love the fact that podcasts can go out and are still discoverable. But the thing that interested me was there's an awful lot of people out there who think they can be broadcasters just simply by getting up and going, so, hello, everybody. And actually, there's a skill to broadcasting. And you need to understand what that skill is. And there are people out there who have made a career out of that skill. I won't necessarily include myself in that number, though I'd like others to be in that number. But I've spent my time interviewing those people who have. So Tony Blackburn, Simon McCoy, Bob Harris amongst them. Timmy Mallet was one of them as well. And I've also spoken to Mark Chapman, who hosts Radio 5's sports output, and indeed is very busy on the Euros at the moment. And it's about going, come on, if I distill essence of Bob Harris, and I've got tincture of Bob Harris, what is special about you that makes you good on radio or on television? What is it about you that keeps that career going? And they've been fascinating, lovely conversations. I need to do a few more of them because that's the one that I've slightly neglected, because I started another one called The Date Advisor. Having experienced the dire paucity of dating apps that are out there, as anyone who's single who's tried them will know, yeah.
I think Tom's head's going to fall off if he nods anymore.
Yeah. Oh, smug marriage, Jamie. I mean, let's just, we don't have to.
Yeah, again, Jamie, off you go.
Yeah, but
sorry.
They are pretty awful. And it was a friend of mine on Christmas Day and I who was sitting there bemoaning our terrible dating profiles and how awful it had been over the years on and off that we've been on. And I said, let's do a bloody podcast. Let's do a podcast about it. And we've been following one or two people on Twitter who have documented their dating dilemmas. And we thought we'd approach a few of them and see if they wanted to join in. So the first one we just basically did for season 1 was what we called our Amorous Alphabet, where we took a series of dating terms, maybe 1 or 2 for each letter. We did 2 letters in each podcast. And we got these lovely Twitter people to talk about their feelings of them. And because we didn't give them their real names, because we only ever used their Twitter handles, I think they were probably happy to expand much more readily than they might have been otherwise. And the thing just took off. We've had 125,000 downloads for the first 14 episodes that we've done.
Wow.
We haven't done season 2 yet because I'm not quite sure how to make it move on to season 2. It's a bit like, you know, that difficult second album. I don't know quite how we can harness the same level of success. But at some point we probably will do. And the third one's very kind of unimportant. The third one is My Christmas Ghost Stories. My mother, bless her heart, was an amazing woman, an incredibly intelligent woman. She was an Oxford academic. She taught English literature, which is where my love of books comes from.
Wow.
But she also studied ghost stories. She wrote a book called Night Visitors, which was about the rise and fall of the English ghost story. And I've always been slightly fascinated by ghost stories ever since. And of course, Christmas is a great time for ghost stories. And about 4 or 5, if not 6 years ago now, I decided instead of sending people a business card for Christmas, I'd send them something that was written, or not necessarily written, but read and produced by me. Now, the difficulty of that was it had to be something out of copyright. So it has to be Victorian pretty much. And I've chosen, and there are a lot of wonderful Victorian ghost writers, even people like E. Nesbit, who wrote The 5 Children and It and The Railway Children and people like that, or some books like that, wrote some fabulous ghost stories. So I've read them and kind of dramatized them, adding some sound effects over throughout the production, and popped them out in an email to my friends and family, and indeed those people I'd done business with during the course of the year, instead of a Christmas card. So they got a kind of bit of me, and it was a bit of self-publicity, to be honest with you, kind of a reminder that I'm quite good at what I do, and you like my voice, don't you? But you know, within that was also the fact that they were quite good fun, and they sat on SoundCloud and never really did anything. They obviously, the people I sent them to, I think about half of them decided to listen. But I think they deserved a wider audience. And I thought, well, I can stick them out as an annual podcast. You don't have to have a podcast every month or every week. You can have an annual one. And because it's up there all the time, of course, it gets relatively constant downloads. So the last 6 years of Ghost Story are up there.
Glorious.
Awesome.
Absolutely. The Date Advisor one, I'm definitely going to check that out, because there's some horrific stories that I could tell you from, you know, dating. That's what I'd love to hear.
We probably need to have you on the next series then. In that case.
I'm in. If you'll have me, John, I'm there, because I could. Yeah, I bet there's people that had worse.
If you like it, have a listen and let us know. But we quite enjoy them, as I say. Actually, if you have a listen, Tom, and with your podcasting expertise, you can probably tell me what I should do with season 2.
I mean, I'll give it a go, but I can't promise you much.
Like I said, dating apps are fascinating, though. Like, I live vicariously through him when it comes to dating apps, because like you say, I'm married, but they are a weird world.
They are an alien world, and unfortunately, it is the only way that people meet these days.
Yeah.
Certainly for the 20 to young 30-year-olds, I think they accept it very naturally. People of my age, of course, used to have this question, which was, so how should we tell people we met? Because nobody actually wanted to confess to meeting online. So you'd have to come up, well, we met at a party hosted by Robert De Niro, or we met in the ice cream aisle of Waitrose, you concoct these stories. So you didn't have to say, yeah, it was Tinder.
Love that. Tom, have you got any more questions?
Yeah, so you've interviewed quite a lot of amazing people, including former President Bill Clinton, I noticed on your, which is absolutely amazing. Like, is that just doing all the conference moderation you do with all the big companies? Is that how you meet all those sort of people?
Yes, this was for a Swedish bank, in fact. And we spent a long time trying to get, they booked Bill, but I worked for them on a couple of other conferences when we'd interviewed some other luminaries as well. And they didn't want Bill to be interviewed by a journalist. Unfortunately, he'd given an interview to a Sky News journalist about 3 months earlier, and we went, but hang on a minute. Look, that interview you did over there with that journalist, you don't really mind it. You're just being awkward. And they went, yeah, all right then. And they then said, but you have to prepare 30 questions in advance so we know what you're going to ask, Bill. And I went, okay, fine. So I've read his biographies, his autobiography. I went through all those and chose about 30 questions, which we submitted. They went, yes, all right, well, fine. Anyway, on the day, he'd flown in by his own plane and was still late. You would have thought, it's a paying gig, you'd be on time, but he was still late. He was about 20, 25 minutes late. There are 800 CEOs of various companies of this Swedish business bank sitting in the audience, twiddling their thumbs, and about to, they've been specially invited as a treat for being great customers of the bank to listen to Bill. Anyway, so I'm doing my best to fill and go, it's okay, ladies and gentlemen, he will be here. Honestly, you're not just stuck with me. And he eventually turns up and he walks onto the stage and he makes a 20, 25-minute presentation that nobody knew he was going to make. We just thought it was going to be the interview. And I'm sitting there in the audience going, oh, shit. I can't ignore the fact that he's made this speech. It was a lovely speech, and it was a clever speech, as you'd expect from a clever man, which was about Sweden and its ability to recycle and be environmentally conscious, which it is, unbelievably so, much more so than we are. And I thought, I'm going to have to ask him about some of the things he's mentioned in the speech. But I do know that the questions have been vetted and checked beforehand. So what am I going to do? So anyway, I get up on stage afterwards as everyone's going, thank you, Bill. And I say, Bill, please do come and take a seat. We need to ask you a few questions. And I start with one of the questions that I know he's agreed to answer. And he answers that perfectly easily and perfectly well. I thought, I'm going to have to go off piste here. What's the worst that can happen? He's going to storm off the stage and say, we didn't agree to speak about that one. And I just thought, it's Bill Clinton. He's probably not going to do that. And so I asked him something which was of relevance to the speech. Why do you think Sweden as an economy has managed to be so much more environmentally conscious than the rest? I can't remember what it was, but it was something like that. And he didn't bat an eyelid at all and just launched into the answer or whatever. And so I included several other questions that were nothing to do with the stuff that we'd originally talked about. And he clearly didn't notice and or wasn't perturbed by any of them. And as we came off afterwards, he shook my hand and said, lovely questions. I really enjoyed that. And it's like, you have no idea what was the questions that we'd originally written for you, because nobody's shown them to you, have you? You haven't even looked at them. They were to cover the asses of your staff that I wasn't going to turn around and say, so what color was Monica Lewinsky's underwear? That was the only reason that this was done. But what was remarkable, and I teach a course on this, which I have been taught to teach myself. I didn't come up with it myself, but it is a very interesting course about charisma. And charisma is a really fabulous thing. There is a tendency to think that people are just born with charisma. You're either charismatic or not. It's not. Charisma is a set of behaviors, and we can all learn to change our behaviors. So you can learn to be more charismatic for both personal and business use. And there are some tricks and techniques to it. And people like Bill and Oprah Winfrey, and some others unexpectedly as well, John Major, would you believe, are immensely charismatic, but only when you meet them in person. And Bill illustrated that. He was schmoozing his way through everybody, and he did something remarkable in some ways at the end, because there's a couple of limousines lined up to take him away after he had done his performance. And he excused himself from chatting to the hosts at that point and just walked over to both the limousines where there were two chauffeurs with their black caps and black suits on, and just shook their hand and said, thank you for everything you do. And immediately nice. That person just went, oh, okay. Yeah. I feel really good now. And that's the art of it. It's about status. Charisma is about status and being able to lift somebody up to your status when you are already high status. And he did that beautifully. He understood that process. He understood the ability to engage somebody directly and really feel that, they are interested in what you have to say. We all go to parties when you're talking to somebody and they're clearly looking over their shoulder to see if somebody more interesting is coming in. Or is that just me? Okay, it's just me. Yeah, that can easily happen. Whereas it's somebody who's charismatic, who's actually sitting there and concentrating on you and making you feel special, even though that person may be far more important generally as society is regarding them than you might feel you are. That's not to say people are unimportant if they're not famous or celebrities. Of course, you are perfectly important, but society dictates a hierarchy and says, Bill Clinton is an important man, whereas John Briggs isn't. So therefore, Bill Clinton's talking to anybody else will be, you will feel honored almost to talk to him. As I say, John Major, incredibly charismatic in person. I mean, he wasn't when he had that terrible corncrake voice, and so I'm still here. Talking on in the House of Commons, he was ridiculed by Spitting Image as being a grey man who wore his underpants outside his trousers. So this couldn't be any worse. But if you met him, he was really good at engaging you, and he was really charismatic and really engaging. And everyone who met him said so, which was why he'd succeeded quite well within politics, because he dealt with the other people around him in a way that people were really engaged by.
I was looking at that charisma course earlier on. Actually, I was like wanting to have a look a bit into it with a bit more detail, because I was like, that'd be quite interesting to do.
I should really try and run a few more of them, and I haven't run them for a while. I mean, clearly we can't do them. They don't work online. You have to do them in person because it's about eye-to-eye contact and understanding levels of conversation between high status and low status people and so on. But I enjoy it because one of the things you realize, like an awful lot of life, is you already know a lot of it. It's just nobody's classified it for you. We do a little experiment whereby we pretend we have an empty underground carriage, and it's 5 o'clock in the morning, and we take the first person and I choose a woman from the group that we've got, because of the way that society has this, and now is very conscious of the differences between men and women and the pressures and tension that can be caused by a man in the presence of a woman. And we say, here's the empty train carriage, and it's just arrived, you're the only person on the station, the doors go zzzz, and we've got several seats with gaps between them, and of course the double doors in the middle. And I say to her, where do you go and sit? And of course, 9 times out of 10, she'll go and sit in a corner, because it means she's only exposing herself, as it were, on one side to anybody else who might then sit with her. The other side is next to a wall. And also because she's got good visibility of anybody who comes in. And then you choose a man and say, the train moves off and it comes to the next station, you're the next person to get on. Where do you sit? And again, 8 or 9 times out of 10, the man will position himself somewhere diagonally opposite from the woman, out of respect generally, because they don't want to crowd the other person. Because if he sat next to her, how creepy would that be? How awkward would she feel? How threatening would he be? So he sits diagonally opposite so that she can see him easily, and he's of no threat to her whatsoever. And then you fill the rest of the carriage as well. But this is a beginning understanding of how status and space go together, which are all part of understanding the way that charisma is utilized in specific situations. So we do a lot of these things naturally. We just don't know it until they're pointed out in some of these exercises, which is why, as I say, it's not easy to teach online. It doesn't really work online. You have to do it in person. But it's fun. It's fun to understand the characteristics that make us human and how we interact with people. And it's becoming more and more important. It really is becoming more important, because we are now becoming more and more understanding of the diversity of our society, but how much we should be able to alter the conversation that allows us to include everyone, simply because someone is different in sex, in age, in beauty, in the color of their skin, should not make any difference to who they are or how successful they can or cannot be. But unfortunately it does. And the reason and the only way you can change that is by having a very open and very inclusive conversation that starts at the top of an organization with the board and then filters down so that everybody understands it. And it's not a box ticking exercise. It's about absolutely thinking clearly about how you communicate to people who perhaps do not share the same views that you do. Because if we can get past that, we can solve an awful lot of problems. And the very fact that we are living in the 21st century, watching people play a game with a ball on a pitch for 90 minutes, and there are people who are keen enough to pay money to go and see that game, who then want to spend time pointing out to some of the players that they believe they are inferior to them because they're watching and they are playing the game and they are a different color of skin to them, is madness. Madness that we still tolerate it, madness that people still do it because it is about lack of education, really more than anything, not necessarily racism per se. But it's also because they've no one to ever engage them in the conversation and gone, have a think about the privileges that you have over people who don't. We talk about white privilege. We all have white privilege here in this group. We don't experience it because actually it's absence of the things that black people face on a day-to-day basis that gives us white privilege. And you can say to somebody who is white, you have white privilege, and they go, no, bloody don't. No, I work damn hard. You want to come and see me? I'm working 7 days a week. I'm working 8 till 10 every bloody day. That's not white privilege, mate. That's hard work. And you go, no, you don't get it. You have white privilege because it is an absence of the things that other people face on a day-to-day basis. You have white privilege because you can walk into a supermarket and the security guard will not come and watch you because of the color of your skin. That's white privilege. But you never notice that. And nor could you, nor would you, because you just don't see it. Because your conversation, your view of life is simply different to someone who has a different skin color to yours, because you simply cannot walk in their shoes. You just not experience the things they experience, and an appreciation of the things they experience, and how you can have a conversation with others to make it better so they do not have to suffer some of the things that you never have to deal with, is the starting point for all of this. So I do believe education is the important thing, but having open conversations with people to engage their intelligence and go, let's just talk about it. There's a brilliant guy called John Amici, whose stuff I've just started beginning to listen to. And John is a former basketball player. He's an American guy who's 6'9", which is why he made a good basketball player. I mean, he didn't particularly enjoy being a basketball player, but he was black and he was 6'9" and he played basketball. And he now lives in Covent Garden in the UK, and he writes and is a sociologist and a spokesperson on a whole range of social ideas and life coach, etc. And he's a educated and thoroughly entertaining man. Apart from anything from the way that he expresses stuff, and he said in a speech I listened to quite recently, or a talk he gave quite recently, he said, "I'm 6'9". I have a long, dark, bushy beard, or greying bushy beard, and I tend to wear a 3-piece suit." And he says, 3 times a year, living in Covent Garden, I tend to get arrested. He said, the last time I got arrested, the policeman said, "Why am I being arrested?" The policeman turned around and said, "You fit the description of a man who has been recently accused of a crime in this area." And you go, I want to meet my doppelganger. I want to meet the man who is 6'9" with a dark bushy beard and wears a 3-piece suit. So, those are the sort of things that a cultured man of his integrity faces on a daily basis that you and I never face. And that does alter your view of the world. Of course it alters your view of the world. But he's very entertaining and informative about it, and actually spends his time trying to educate others to understand that, difference is not something to be fearful of. Difference actually requires inclusion. Difference requires conversation to actually go, look, I'm really sorry, I might not necessarily understand how you see the world. So can you tell me how I could help you make life a little bit easier for you in terms of my behavior? That's all it is. It's as simple as that. Asking people, giving people options rather than simply dealing with them at face value. Asking them how they want to be dealt with. Asking them how they'd like others to behave. You still have the choice then about how you behave, and if you're a complete dickhead, you can carry on being a dickhead if you want to. But don't do it without an understanding of what other people who might be different to you face on a daily basis, particularly when you are not having to face those things and you have the privilege of not having to deal with those things on a daily basis.
Where is my standing ovation button?
Tom, it doesn't deserve it. But what is appalling is that we don't think like that. We don't deal with the world around us like that. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why, from our upbringing through to the cultural icons that we have observed, that we agree with, that we disagree with. But at one basic level, there should be an appreciation of other human beings, no matter what they believe in, no matter what their skin color is, no matter what they are capable of, just for being capable and human beings. I find it very difficult. My best friend, a lovely man called Eugene, it has Jamaican background, so he's black, and I'm white, and we are best mates, and we spend our time going. You go, oh, so you're friends? He said, no, we're brothers. We were separated at birth. And people go, really? And I go, no, of course not really. But I have amazing conversations with Eugene because he's a very analytical man, and he teaches me an awful lot. He taught me a lot of things that I've just spoken to you about. And I do find it fascinating. But I can stand Eugene and myself side by side. There's only one difference between us. I mean, he's probably more handsome than I am, but there's only one difference, is that his skin color is a different color to mine. And actually, a lot of people spend their time trying to lie in the sun to look closer to his color, don't they? That's why we go on holiday, to lie in the sun, and because we want to go darker. It's ridiculous. You can stand a man and a woman side by side, and you can see the differences. There are major differences. But actually men and women are supposed to get together and have a jolly old time and get married and bring up children and so on. I mean, there's huge differences between men and women. There's not between black and white and the same sex. There's nothing. There's just a different skin color. So why is there this huge dislike sometimes of people who look different to us? I don't get it. I've never got it.
No, I've never understood.
My dying day, I won't get it. But it's time we had the conversation.
I agree, John. I think that's the best way that we should end this interview, because
definitely
spectacular. You are so spot on, and that's how I live my life. Is I don't go, oh, I'm not going to interact with that person because they're mixed race, or I literally just see people and I talk to everyone about anything because it's just people. That's we're human beings. Doesn't matter. I can't believe that the police still live in this archaic age of, well, they're different skin colours, so you better watch it because you never know. Society tells me that they're more likely to do this, that, and the other. Bullshit. Absolute bullshit.
It's become ingrained in how we behave, and it's time to talk about that behaviour.
100%.
Simple awareness will make the changes.
Agreed.
Right. John, before we get out of here, have you got any plugs, social medias, anything like that you want people to check out?
Well, check out my TikTok, because there are hopefully some funny things on there, at Voice of Siri, and to check out the podcasts. The podcast is one of them's Jon Briggs Christmas Ghost Stories, so that's the annual one. Date Advisor is the other one. That's available on all good podcasting apps, the Apple app, Spotify, Google, all of that lot. We've managed to get it onto all of them. And the other one, if you want to know about broadcasting careers, is called You're on the Air! And you'll find it on you'reontheair.co.uk. Plug over.
John, this has been an absolute pleasure. We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for letting me rabbit on.
Oh, you're so welcome.
So from me and the bunny.
Oh, we need a name.
Sylvester
the bunny. Okay.
I like that.
It's funny because I always thought you were female, but apparently you're male.
Okay, we can give her a it's just
Sylvestra.
Sylvestra. Yes.
Sylvestra, that works.
Perfect.
Or Julia, in honour of the lady whose cleavage you didn't stir.
Oh, poor old Julia Roberts. No, I don't think Jules would appreciate that.
But seriously, John, thank you so much again. We really appreciate your time. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much indeed, guys. Great talking to you guys.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Hopefully we'll catch up soon.
Take care.
Indeed.
Take care,
Thank you very much, man.
Thank you very much.